appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, no doubt, no doubt.
You know
Uh,
what made my year so far is when I knew you were typing to see if I was live because you saw me on there, and then I
yeah,
saw you a smile go on your face, like, oh, he's streaming me.
he
Oh
is
Lord.
streaming. Yeah, I picked up on it
Okay,
from the
just
Oh, you got to
settings.
close
It's
your other
just like a
tab.
serious matrix in there, right? That's like
Oh,
8,000.
hang on. Make sure your other tab is closed. I did the same. Otherwise, we're gonna hear each other twice. Okay, I'm good. Are you good?
Yeah, if it's not like giving out a.
Yeah, we're good. Okay.
Let me just end my stream maybe.
No, leave it going because a lot of your followers will be too scared to come to my channel because of how evil we are.
Shame on them.
Okay, yeah, you can send them my way.
Yeah, go subscribe, man. Go
Send them
subscribe to
just tell them to go to
channel.
Pine Creek channel.
You guys should be interacting
Yes. Thank you for
with
saying
people who
that.
disagree with you.
Thank you for saying that.
I mean, let me actually see. I want to close these things down. I got multiple screens. It's so annoying.
I know. I got a lot of tabs up too.
It's just I use Ecamm and you're using like a different. I want to see if I can post this up. Let me see. And okay, this is gonna be funny.
Yeah, I have to do that too in order when I'm. That's fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
So you're still live streaming then?
Yes.
Okay.
I haven't stopped. Let me see.
Yeah, because I know a lot of theists, a lot of Christians are scared to even come on my channel because it might be an entryway to the evil one.
Oh.
Or I'm just an old man who likes to argue.
Wait, how old are you?
Oh, I am so old that when I was born, the Dead Sea was only sick.
That's cha-ching. Where is it? Ding, ding. You got some.
I'm 52. Yeah. I'm almost 52.
Oh, so I got a brother that was born in 1975. So you're not.
I'm not like
to,
way
to
out
me.
there.
Yeah, well, to me, you're not that old, right? Like I got. If I have a brother, not take a couple of years away from you.
How old are you?
That's a bit different. I am 37.
37. Okay, yeah, you're a youngling.
Yeah, I got 3 kids.
Good for you. Kids are our future, you know. Teach them
Yeah,
well, let them
good.
lead the way.
They're fun.
Show them all the beauty you possess inside, Archer.
Oh man, you can say Arthur, by the way. Just it's a weird thing.
Okay,
it's
Arthur.
a weird Eastern European transliteration.
Okay, well, look,
it's an English name.
Let's talk deep but very polite and kindly, okay?
Let's hope so.
Yeah, and you want to start by asking me anything you want?
Well, no, I mean, I guess you guys were just having fun, and you're like, hey, this guy who's doing apologetics is on. Let's go.
Yeah, someone said that you were on, and I don't view what I did as a bad thing because it made you smile, and I think it's, having someone get like a rush of people coming on the channel is a good feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and it takes quite a bit to get me not to smile. So
yeah. But the question I asked you in your live stream chat, I think is a good question. And one that a lot of Christians almost feel paralyzed to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And for those,
which is why I think the Bible is the Word of God.
Yeah. And
well, there's multiple ways one can argue for this. I actually pick an easier way maybe of arguing and takes the argument somewhere else. That you're probably used to that. I think the easiest way a Christian can answer this question, instead of getting boggled down with all the like evidences and all the details and manuscripts and stuff like that, is just base it on the resurrection. If Jesus resurrected from the dead, I would say, then the Bible's the Word of God. And I mean, by default, God resurrected. By default, it would mean God exists. Jesus, who is he who said he was. So, in regards to, I don't like build up. You could say, right? Like, so you can have the argument in 2 ways. You can build up to it, which I think is a bigger task. It's probably more difficult to do.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why a lot of people get paralyzed by it, because they try to give reasons and then they go, well, what about this portion in the Old Testament? That's like very strange and weird, and we might not have answers for it. Or you just get your foundation right, assuming Christianity is true, assuming Jesus actually did rise from the dead, then the Bible would be the Word of God.
See, help me understand that, because I can imagine Jesus rising from the dead and even being God incarnate, and yet the Bible at least not being entirely the word of God. Some of it could be, some of it not. Right? Isn't that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I mean, uh, then at that point, I guess the atheist would have to secede or concede a point of obviously God existing and somehow having some revelation. I mean, having Jesus be the resurrection, having Jesus be the Son of God and God incarnate, and his resurrection being the fact that God exists. He's revealed himself at the very least in a person and in the written word to a certain extent, because Jesus affirmed the Old Testament, and then picked a bunch of disciples who he told to go and make disciples of their own. And so he had a certain kind of trust in them that he would guide them and lead them. Behold, I'm with you till the end of the age and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Do you understand why a guy like me might say that, like, is very skeptical why the Bible has anything to do with a God?
why anybody would say
Why I like
the Bible?
Like, for example, why do you think I would be skeptical that the Bible has anything to do with a God?
I don't know. I mean, you would have to explain that. Depends on your starting point.
Well, even like I can imagine me being a theist, even, and saying and still being skeptical the Bible has anything to do with a deity, because
I'm
throughout
yeah, I'm having a hard time making those connections.
because like just imagine all those religions that you and I would both agree on are at least at its core is false.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they have holy texts like the Hindu Vedas or the Quran or the Book of Mormon or whatever you want to say. Sure, there might be some true things in there, but I could even imagine being a theist right now and saying, hey, I'm very skeptical that the Bible or that the Book of Mormon has anything to do with a God, that the Quran has anything to do with God. I can imagine, I can see men getting together and taking themes that they might have been raised with, changing some things and creating this book over many years. Or a guy like Joseph Smith having some problems with the New Testament and creating a new book. So I could be a theist and still say all those things. But then the question is, couldn't I be a theist and say that the Bible itself has nothing to do with a God?
Well, I wouldn't. I think there's a difference between saying it has nothing to do with God and saying it has something to do with that.
Well, sure.
You got to kind of, yeah, it really, because that's not the way typically people speak about inspiration, right? They don't say this has nothing to do with God. What they're going to say is, say like someone believes in partial inspiration, right? Which is a view some people hold. The idea there being that the important faith aspects about God are actually inspired, but there could be mistakes in there when it comes to historical data, numbers, things of that sort. So there's folks that already believe that are theists that would even claim to be Christians that hold to something like partial inspiration. But I think the arguments as to why I would use against like the Quran or something like that is because of their mode of inspiration. Even Mormonism, not sure about the Hindu kind of stuff, but it would be like Islam, for example, claims that all this stuff was dictated. Okay, so they believe in dictation. The Christian doesn't believe in dictation,
right?
In regards to inspiration. And so if it's dictated, it can't have any
errors,
historical thing wrong.
Right.
But if it says, for example, in Islam, this, oh, Jesus never died, right? This idea is taught in the Quran. It's like, well, he did die. You guys are wrong historically. Like, how could God get that wrong? That he never died.
But do you see what I'm saying? That like, can you imagine a God existing but having nothing to do with the Bible, and yet we still see the Bible exactly as we see it today? Like, let's say that was true. I know you believe it's not true, but let's say it were true.
I can imagine a deistic world, sure.
Okay, so imagine a deistic world, and we have the Bible exactly as we have it, and this God out in the deistic realm says, hey, this has nothing to do with me. Here's my question to you. How would it be possible for the Bible to exist exactly the way we see it today, and yet a deity has nothing to do with it?
Yeah, I'm not very sure what I would say that's possible. I could imagine a world in which there's a God, like a deistic sense of a God, and revelations or claims of revelations floating out there.
Right.
But I wouldn't say the Bible being the way exactly it is now, because then you're going to deal with this issue of, I would have to give up belief in Jesus. Let me just put it simply like that. In order for me to imagine that,
Right. So I'm
like,
asking you
you
to
wouldn't be able
imagine.
to be a Christian.
Yeah, I'm imagining you the core propositions of Christianity and the Bible being false, a God still existing. And I'm asking you, how could we have the Bible exactly the way we have it today, yet it still be false at its core?
Can you rephrase that in a different form?
So let's say I have direct access to the one and only true God, and this God told me to tell you that he has nothing to do with the Bible. And now here's my question. How do you explain the Bible? We have it. How do you explain it if God himself told you he had nothing to do with it?
Oh, your only conclusion would be that the people in the Bible, the writers of the Bible, made stuff up and lied.
Okay, that's one explanation.
It would be the only one, because there's claims in there that would have to be lies.
Like which ones?
Paul's statement about seeing the risen Christ. Any one of the disciples making statements, even if you get past Paul, like, oh, he had some kind of a vision or whatever like that.
Right.
He was high or something. I don't know.
Which is different than lying, right?
Yeah, but then the disciples who are claiming to be eyewitnesses.
Did they though?
Yeah.
Name one disciple that claimed to be an eyewitness.
I think Luke is very clearly arguing that he interviewed eyewitnesses and he wrote this stuff down.
But does he actually say he interviewed eyewitnesses? And was he an eyewitness himself?
Yeah, he says he interviewed eyewitnesses.
No, read
the beginning chapter of Luke.
No, he does not. He said he compiled narratives that preceded him, but it doesn't actually say he sat down and asked people questions. It doesn't say that.
No, he compiled a narrative.
Right, but he never, it actually doesn't say he interviewed anybody. We can look at it together if you want.
Sure, yeah.
Luke chapter 1. So this is the...
Oh, you got it up. Okay,
This is the NIV version.
Yeah, not a big fan, but okay.
What version do you like?
Oh, that's okay. It's okay. Just use it. You have it up.
Many have Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. It doesn't say here he interviewed anyone.
No, notice what it says in verse 2. Just as they were handed down to us by those from who were first eyewitnesses,
right,
and servants of the word. So who are the eyewitnesses and servants of the word?
So these were the first eyewitnesses that he's claiming, but it doesn't say he...
Well, who are they?
He doesn't say who they are here.
Of course he does, because with this in mind, with what in mind? That these people wrote this stuff down, who were eyewitnesses.
Right.
I myself have carefully investigated everything.
But it says that was handed to him.
No, it says I carefully investigated these matters.
Right, but it doesn't say he interviewed anyone.
So okay, so if you were writing a book, I don't know if you might already have written books. I'm not sure.
No.
But okay, so if you were writing a book and you were carefully investigating matters, both of a historical account, but let's just say it's recent history where some of those people are still alive. Would you go and talk to these people? Is it that unreasonable to say that he didn't talk to these people?
That's very reasonable, but I'm just stating what the text says and doesn't say, and it doesn't say here. Now you're implying that he did, but it actually doesn't say he did.
That's fine. If you want verbatim him saying, I sat down and interviewed people, yeah, he doesn't say I sat down and interviewed people.
So
yeah,
we're agreed on that. Now, it might be reasonable to think that he did, but he actually doesn't say that.
I think it's a proper rational implication that he did.
Okay. Now I'll give you that. That's an implication. Okay. But it actually doesn't say that in the text. So now we have a situation where, did Luke ever claim to be an eyewitness of Jesus' resurrection?
No, I don't think Luke is an eyewitness of Jesus'
Okay.
resurrection.
So now my question is there anyone in the New Testament other than Paul? I agree with Paul. I mean, I agree that Paul makes that claim. Is there anyone who says that they themselves, as an eyewitness, I saw the risen Jesus, like Paul said? Is there anyone other than Paul who says that in the New Testament?
Well, I think considering if we're looking at Mark, then I think Mark being Peter's. Let me actually pull up my Bible. Just give me a second.
And I really appreciate you going through this with me, because
Yeah, no
a
doubt.
lot of Christians don't like doing this, but it gives you insight on like the brain of a skeptic a little bit, like, or I should say a brain of a guy like me, because I would make the claim that no one other than Paul actually comes out and says, I saw the risen Jesus.
Yeah. Again, I'm a bit want to be a bit careful with whether individuals come out and say, "Well, here's what happened with me,"
Right.
right? And I think there's some common sense that ought to be applied in these conversations. So when Paul says something like, "Well, a bunch of these guys are still alive," I'm paraphrasing obviously here, right?
Yeah.
Hey, a bunch of these guys are still alive. We can go talk to them. I don't think he's making those statements like in the air.
Yeah, but
I think generally means, hey, they're alive.
in a way,
They're his companions.
in a way that, like, I know what you're talking about in 1 Corinthians 15, but for a guy like me, and I say, okay, who is he writing to? This is the Corinthians, the people in Corinth.
Sure.
And so imagine you're in Corinth and you get this letter and you're skeptical and say, okay, I want to investigate this for myself. You realize how much work it would be to actually go to Jerusalem from Corinth? And this,
Yeah.
and you got to remember, this is 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years after the fact. So now a lot of these people probably are dead. You got to get on a boat for, if you can afford it, to take time off work. You got to go all the way across, is it the Mediterranean? Then you got to get on a camel or walk for a few days. Then you got to get into Jerusalem, and then you got to try to find people who are actually there, who saw it with their own eyes, and ask them. Like, it's very easy for a guy like Paul to speak to the people in Corinth and say, hey, if you don't believe me, go.
Sure.
I mean,
again, then what you're arguing for is that Paul is essentially lying. At the most.
Well, yeah, I actually think that he might have had some type of vision and truly himself believed it was true, even though it was false.
Correct, but then he doesn't say, "Well, I just had this vision." He's saying, "Hey, I had this vision. Plus, all these other people saw this," and then that aspect of it would be he's lying.
Well, no, because other people could have had a similar vision to him. And even in 1 Corinthians 15, when he says that Jesus appeared to the 500, doesn't mention any names. Like, so it's not like the people in Corinth can go, okay, I got to find,
Sure.
And then he mentions,
or it could be that people were just aware of these folks and he just says 500.
He mentions Peter by name and himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people actually believe that Christianity was started by Peter and Paul.
Yeah. No, I know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
two people.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people believe lots of things. I mean, for me, that's not give or take. Like some people believe this.
But what's really easy for guys like me and you to do and agree upon is what the Bible actually says and what it doesn't say. And so we can come up with different conclusions. You can be a Christian, I could be a non-Christian, but we can agree on Luke never says he interviews people. You can imply it. You can say it's reasonable to imply it, but he actually never says that. And nowhere in the New Testament, other than Paul, do we have people saying, I saw the risen Jesus. I've searched, had this challenge for years.
Well, I get what you're going, where you're going with the argument. I mean, there's clearly an empty tomb, right?
There's clearly an empty tomb?
Yeah, so the claim of the empty tomb, let's put it, if you want to be like very...
Right, there's a claim, but in our earliest sources, that claim's not there. Paul never mentions an empty tomb. Now, again, you can say it's implied, like Luke implied he interviewed witnesses, but the whole idea of an empty tomb came another few decades after Paul. right?
What do you mean? When would you say the empty tomb claim would have come?
Mark, the Gospel of Mark, which is the
Okay, and
first
you're
gospel
dating
written,
Mark, and you're dating Mark when?
at least a decade after Paul.
Which is when?
I would say most scholars say Corinthians, for example, was written in the 55s. So this would be in the 65s,
Okay.
maybe 70. So now we have
Yeah, I wouldn't.
30 to 40 years later.
Okay, so if
have
we
the
got Luke,
claim
okay,
of-
so let's put it this way. I think Luke is easier. If the Gospel of Acts ends with with Paul arrested, right, in Rome, you're looking at the late 60s.
for
If Acts
okay,
if Acts is ending with Paul arrested in Rome,
I'm totally fine with that. If you actually want to give an early
so what I'm
dating
saying
for
is
everything,
then Luke
that's fine.
then Luke would have to be, what I'm saying is, here's where I'm going with this. Then Luke would have to be
Before Paul,
earlier than Acts.
okay. And if I
So Luke and Acts are a 2-volume book.
right, but if I give you that,
Yeah.
how does that help you?
Because Luke very clearly uses Mark and Matthew. They would have to be earlier sources.
Right, but Mark is still after Paul, or are you saying Mark's before Paul?
See, before and after Paul is just like a weird.
After the writing of
Reference.
Corinthians, for example.
After 55 AD,
I'll give you 56. It doesn't matter though.
yeah, I mean, like, here's the thing, right? Like, yeah, if you want to do stuff like that, it's like, okay, if Luke is written in, like, let's just say 62 AD or something like that, and then Mark's written in 56 AD, it's like, okay, but these would be
See, like
contemporary sources.
most atheists like myself are happy to give Christians like yourself all that. We just want to hear Christians admit, okay, we don't have first eyewitness testimony, meaning it's very clear that we know what that means. When I think of eyewitness, I'm thinking of someone who says, this is what I saw. That's an eyewitness account. We don't have that in the Gospels. Like the name Luke is not even in the book of Luke. The name Mark is not even in the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
And so it's true.
But to conclude that it's not them, to conclude and completely get rid of, say, the earliest sources we have of it saying it is them, what I think is very unreasonable.
Okay.
It's just for the sake of being a skeptic.
But then we have this problem though, and I think we're agreed on this, I hope, that if you and I were to see a car accident and want to really know the truth of who's at fault and what exactly happened, we take the witnesses and we separate them, and then we go interview them and ask them individually, right? That's a very reasonable thing to do, because what happens if you don't do that? Well, then, in fact, I was in a car accident about a year ago, and someone ran a red light and hit me, so it wasn't my fault. But then I actually started questioning myself. Did I actually see a green light? Did I really have a green light? Am I at fault, or was their fault? I started doubting myself. So then I actually went to the person who hit me and I said, you went through a red light, right? And she said, no, I didn't. You went through a red light. And we started talking, and then another witness was there. And I started talking, and this is before the cops came. And when the cops came, they separated us and then asked us, okay, just tell in your own words what you saw. Now, if we bring this back to the New Testament, if we take the traditional authorship of the New Testament, Paul knew Luke, Luke knew Paul, Mark knew Peter, Peter knew Mark, Matthew knew John, John knew Matthew. They all knew each other. So this is the situation where we have people, the authors of the New Testament, all knowing each other and coming up with what one could say is a narrative. This is not independent eyewitness accounts.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily see a problem there, whether people know each other or not. I mean, you're implying motive here, and I think that's a big problem.
Well, yeah,
and you're not only implying motive, you're implying negative motive.
No, I'm
like there's some kind of a facetious kind of thing of them implying this. Yeah,
I agree with you that I'm implying motive, and the motive is, I think that the people in the first century, the first Christians, truly believed that the kingdom of God was at hand, and that, and then that there was this idea of God returning and collecting his children and that sort of thing. But I do think, and I know Michael Licona has even admitted this, that it was a type of propaganda, but not in the bad sense. Like from the Christian point of view, you can admit it's propaganda, but in a good sense, that even the Gospel of John says, I write these things that you may know you have eternal life.
Correct.
Yeah. And so it was, if you take the traditional authorship, we have a situation of people not only knowing each other, but interacting with each other as they're writing these things, and even disagreeing with each other on some things, but coming up with a narrative for this greater good.
Would you not say that there was an easier lie they could have come up with?
An easier lie?
Yeah. I mean, if they're making a narrative up, I think there's a much easier narrative to come up with.
What's that?
That like people can't defeat.
What's that?
That Jesus rose supernaturally, not physically.
When some Christians actually say that.
No Orthodox Christian believes that. No Orthodox Christian says that Jesus rose.
Right.
The claim is, at least in the New Testament and then in Christian Orthodoxy, is that this is a physical resurrection and a physical ascension.
Right. And this is what's interesting. This is what some scholars find Paul very interesting, because he really doesn't talk about the life and ministry of Jesus. He doesn't really talk about the tombs or people going to the tombs or seeing Jesus on the streets. It's basically, this has already happened. Now let's talk about what it means and how to live.
Yeah, for me, it's like scholars say quite a bit of stuff. I've read quite a bit of them. So, and depending who you're reading and what they're coming from, that's all fair. I don't think Paul needed to do any of that stuff. To kind of put our own expectations of what someone ought to have done in a given situation without understanding the situation they're in. It's.
I understand that Paul had other.
It's just talk.
He had bigger fish.
Yeah, I mean, let's just come up with a scenario in which where Paul looks at it and goes, "Well, hey, look, my friend Luke here has done that. Why am I going to repeat that stuff?" That seems pretty commonsensical. Like if Paul knows Luke and Luke's already compiled something, why would Paul do that again when he's busy, say, ministering?
For the same reason Matthew copied or said
I think they have completely different reasons for writing what they wrote.
Right, I know, but we have the synoptic problem, or they do repeat each other. So maybe Luke could have repeated, or Paul could have repeated things that Luke said. But what I was
sure, but it's an argument of silence either way, is what I'm saying. It's like whether the scholars are saying, well, Paul doesn't talk about these things and stuff like that. It's like, well, he doesn't need to. And the claim could be it's an argument from silence.
Right.
And I would be like, cool, but so is yours.
Yeah. Well, I'll give that to Theus. That's fine. But it's interesting to me what Paul doesn't say as well as what he does say. But let's get like big picture type thing.
Sure.
If my own wife, who I've known for 32 years, came up to me and said that someone who we both know was dead, that she had a conversation and ate with them in a cafe that day, I would not believe my own wife, who I know and trust and love.
Sorry, if she said what?
That she ate with someone that we both have known to be dead for years.
Okay.
All right?
Okay. Yeah.
I would not believe her. My own wife, I would not believe.
Okay.
If she made that type of claim. So-and-so has been dead for 3 years. Well, I met him and we went out for lunch. I would think that there was a tumor in my wife's head. Right? So now, let me ask you this. If your own wife said something similar to you, would you believe her?
Well, I don't think that's the claim. I don't think it's a fair. So here, it would be the equivalent claim, I guess, would be if my wife came and said, "Hey, I just ate with someone who has recently died. Let's say 4 days ago."
Okay.
I'd be like, okay. I'd probably have a Thomas moment there, just knowing me. I'd be like, cool, right. But can I have lunch with him? Too, right? Like that's what it would be. I wouldn't necessarily just distrust her. Now I've known my wife for 12 years, not 30 something years. But yeah, I mean,
but why wouldn't you
I think
believe
that's
your
a
wife?
normal claim.
Why wouldn't you believe your wife?
Well, it's not that I wouldn't believe her. I wouldn't disbelieve her. I trust that everything if everything was functioning right under the normal circumstances,
Would
let's
you
just
be
say.
completely agnostic if your wife came up to you and said, I had lunch with someone who was dead 4 days ago? You'd be completely agnostic?
I don't know if I would be completely agnostic. Um,
Because I wouldn't believe my
but my
wife if she said that. Like my,
yeah, but
I wouldn't
like
assume
how
any
much?
negative. I wouldn't assume any negative intention on her. Like I would come
Yeah.
up with other explanations. Like she's sick, she's on drugs. Someone put something in her drink, and I got to figure out what's going on here. But my immediate assumption would be she's telling the truth. That in reality, she had lunch with someone who was dead 4 days ago. Like, are we that much? Are we that different?
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just it really depends. I mean, if you have a wife that habitually says these sorts of things, then yeah, I would have a lot more
My wife doesn't. My wife's
distrust,
a very
right? Like,
honest person.
yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, would you really have reason to distrust her, or
Yes.
is it just like, and what's the reason that these things don't happen?
Yeah. Well, at least very rarely.
Yeah. So I would say that's a worldview issue. If
Well,
you had
you
a different kind
disagree
of
that
worldview,
you disagree that
yeah,
people come
I
back
think
from
your
the dead
worldview.
rarely.
I actually think your worldview would dictate the way you interpret this.
Well, let me ask you one more time because I don't know if I got a clear answer from you.
I have a supernatural worldview, right? Like, so I believe in supernatural occurrences and things
Okay,
of that
but that's
sort.
fine. But even if you do have a supernatural worldview, you don't believe that people come back from the dead after 4 days on a regular basis, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's very, very,
But
very rare,
I think
right?
they can.
Okay, they can,
Yeah, sure.
but it's very
Yeah, I
rare,
mean,
right?
sure.
So would you say then if your wife came up to you and said that she had lunch with someone who's been dead 4 days ago, even the funeral had happened, put in a tomb, would you believe that actually happened, or would you say that no, it didn't? It probably didn't happen, and there's another explanation.
My immediate reaction would be, cool. Can we get in contact with him? I'm just telling you what a raw reaction would be. I think when we go out of I think when we go out of our way to just distrust people we know and have known for a very long time, in scenarios of this sort, I think we're setting up the arguments to favor whatever our persons are.
Okay, so you would believe her if you could verify it, though, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And you said you would want to have lunch with him too. What if your wife said, sorry, after lunch, he ascended into the clouds and left and went to heaven?
So this is exactly what I mean, that there was an easier lie that they could have come up with.
But let's say she's
So
not
the
lying.
disciple-
Let's say she actually had
it's
this experience.
Yeah. Well, if we're looking at the disciples, right? I mean, that's the fair comparison. So if we're looking at the disciples, right? It's the I don't know if you've heard this or not, but it's the pink elephant in the lobby argument. Right? I come to you and I say, hey, I was just in the lobby. There was a pink elephant there on his laptop, just typing away, and you say, I don't believe it. I go, nope. Let's go downstairs. We'll go check out the elephant on his laptop. So we go down to the lobby. There's two options. You say, hey, I don't believe it. It's not there. I can't see the elephant in the lobby. And then my response to you is, oh man, only a select few of us can see the lobby, the elephant in the lobby. Sorry. You're not one of the select few. Or you say, yeah, I do see it. And I go, oh man, you're one of us. Great. Right. So they could have come up with this sort of an argument when it comes to their contemporaries, right? Like say the Jewish leadership or whatever like that. They could have very easily said that he resurrected non-physically. The claims, the arguments are that he resurrected physically. We physically saw him, right? Those are the claims. That's a much bigger claim to defend than the other one. The argument you're giving me is the one I just gave in regards to the pink elephant. If my wife had said that, then I would be a lot more skeptical towards that. But that's not what's going on within at least the narrative of the New Testament.
Okay. Well,
that's not what Christianity claims.
Okay. But I can make the wife situation similar to the New Testament and then ask if you believe it. So let's say she said to you, I've never told this to you before, Arthur, but I got to share something with you now. 10 years ago, I had lunch with someone. You remember so-and-so, he died 10 years ago? Well, 4 days after, I had lunch with him. And I never told you this before, but I feel I need to share it with you. Then I will ask you, well, would you believe her?
Did anybody else see this?
And then she says to you, yes.
Okay.
They don't say it in the first person, but and they're all dead now, but they wrote down 4 diaries and they also saw it. And so she said, here's the diaries. You can read them for yourself.
Yeah, and we'd go back and read the diaries and then try to come up with whatever the reasonable conclusion there would be.
So would the reasonable conclusion be that these diaries written, let's say 5, 10, 15, 20 years after the event that your wife is talking about, they don't sign it, they're not dated, and you read these diaries, would you say, oh, your wife did in fact have lunch with a dead person who came back to life?
Again, it would be whatever else is corroborating those with those diaries, what other people are saying around them, to the extent they went to defend their view of these things. Right? Like, is it that they just wrote these diaries down?
Would you believe it just based on the 4 diaries?
Would I believe it based on the 4 diaries?
And your wife's testimony?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But I wouldn't necessarily disbelieve it, is what I'm saying. I would look at the evidences.
But would you be leaning towards disbelief or belief? You'd be completely agnostic?
I'm not sure if any of us are really completely agnostic or not. I'm not sure whether that zero bar is the case for any one of us on any subject.
Right. See, and what's happening, I think, in this conversation is that as I'm asking you these questions, you're building up the cumulative case for Jesus, right? You're starting with the gospel accounts, the martyrdom, and then probably we'll go to prophecies, and we can layer them in one at a time. But if your answer is, well, I wouldn't believe, but I wouldn't disbelieve, I want to know, at what point would you believe it? Like, where does your needle say, yes, okay, now I believe my wife?
Yeah, it's very difficult because we don't have one-to-one correlations necessarily. Let's just say those 4 diary writers, including my wife, are willing to go to the death all separately from one another. Like you were saying, the cops would separate you and look at your evidences, right? So let's just take the accident. By the way, my wife was in an accident with my kids about a year ago as well. Really horrendous one. But so, there's all these people seeing it, the cops come and separate them and stuff like that. And then there's a real threat of these guys, including yourself in that given situation, or the individual that was saying, no, you ran the red light and you hit me. And there's a real threat on their life, on that information. You think that person would have kept up their part of the lie? It's like, cool. If we come across some information here, you're going to get the death penalty. You think they would have kept that up? Would you have kept it up if you were lying?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying, is that the evidences around these things, it's just not these claims they make. These guys went to the death. I mean, one of the disciples that ended up going and doing missionary work in my own home country where I was born, right? They filleted him alive. I mean, I would suppose if you're being filleted alive, you'd crack and say, we made this stuff up, man. Like,
well, Kate,
that's
interesting, because in order to say, like you mentioned the missionary recently, he could still be wrong. Like, Christianity could be false, and he could still truly believe it's real. And
that, yeah.
But we're talking about the people who were in the know, like the disciples, right?
No, I was talking about the disciples who went to my home country, and so Thaddeus and Bartholomew ended up in Armenia, and they killed both of them.
Do we know that they, number 1, claimed to see it, and number 2, had a chance to recant?
Yes.
We know this.
As far as I know, yes. Well, no, based on historical records. I mean, the thing is that it would have been extremely beneficial to the government and anyone opposed to these individuals for them to recant, right? And hold them up and say, look, these people were lying. Don't convert to them. Continue with our paganism. We're doing good. We don't need foreign nonsense here.
But couldn't they have been killed for another reason, like sedition or this? I'm imagining this, and this could be totally false. But let's say one of the first Christians who was in the know, one of the disciples, for example, they said, you either recant that Jesus rose from the dead, or we'll kill you. And let's say it is a lie, and the guy says, I recant. Okay,
Mhm.
we're going to kill you. And then kill them anyhow.
Yeah, it's just I have issues with these what if arguments. It's what if,
Well,
but that's not in any
well,
way supported by any kind of evidence.
right. Well, is what I'm asking you, do we have any evidence that they had that chance to recant in the first place?
What I'm saying is, if clearly they're being persecuted for the preaching of that thing. So if they're changing their mind on it and they recant from it and they say no, and we've had plenty of folks throughout history who've recanted whatever views they've had, staves their own neck.
But we don't have any evidence, I think, of them having the opportunity to recant, the disciples. So if a disciple's seen another disciple recant and still being killed, then maybe they're going, well, what good is it to recant? Because I might as well die a martyr and hopefully they'll remember me in posterity.
It's like not many of them were around each other when they were all killed.
Okay, fair enough.
They were in completely different places. I mean, there wasn't even like this communal kind of pressure on them to keep people alive.
But you know Sean McDowell, right? He did his
I know of him.
Yeah, he did his dissertation on the martyrdom, and he's on record saying we only have good evidence that there were 2, maybe 3 martyrs in the New Testament, like that we can be confident we know what happened, and a rest of the martyrdom stories is like from traditions up to a century later that are right alongside a lot of other embellishments, so like Jesus coming out of the grave, like a giant guy holding a big cross.
Yeah. Gnostic text.
Yeah, and so it's like a lot of these ideas of martyrdom, though they were willing to die, a lot of it is just made up stuff, traditions. But we do have.
Well, I think that's a giant leap between something not being what Sean would say fit like historical scrutiny or something like that to something being just entirely made up.
Well,
like just because it's tradition doesn't mean it's entirely made up.
Yeah, you're right. They could have died as martyrs, but it wouldn't be any different than the martyrs we see in Islam and other things where, hey, it's still not true. They still were willing to die for it. Like I have a friend who's really big in history. He's in Eastern Europe, and he showed me texts where some pagan religions, they were anxious to die martyrs. They wanted it, and so they were willing to die for something false. And because of this whole idea of I will be remembered at least, and so we got that factoring in as well.
Yeah, there would have to be an internal kind of argument from the Christian perspective that these guys are like really willing, not really willing. I mean, they're willing, that they're on like this quest to die.
Well, I think that quest to die was real back then.
No, Paul says, hey, look, we desire to live at peace with all men. That doesn't sound like a guy who just really wants to die, right? He's like, hey,
well, you did say that that he was anxious to die, but God has a purpose for him here on earth.
Well, yeah, but he's using that in a spiritual sense, right? He's saying, look, I would say this is more beneficial for me, but he's not going out there, I would say, and saying, hey, kill me, I want to die now. That's what I'm saying. His desire is, and when he says we, I mean, there could be a personal desire. You could even say, I'm thinking on my feet here, by the way, so be gracious. Or you could be gracious. Comment section, be gracious, because you guys are.
They're pretty good. I've been watching it.
No, I'm not even looking at it. By the way, I don't know. It's just it's YouTube, man. You know it. You know, like someone's gonna pop in out of left field and be like, "This guy, where is it?"
Be nice in the live stream chat.
Yeah, let's be nice to each other. But I would say making a personal statement, like so. Paul says, for me, it's more beneficial to die, or it's a gain for me to die and be with Christ. But it's beneficial for you guys to be here. That's a personal sort of thing. When he's making that statement about, we desire to be at peace with all men, is a communal Christian understanding. It seems to me. And if there was some kind of a teaching that Christians should go out there, there's quite a bit of martyrdom, obviously, in the first couple of centuries. This is what they, the ultimate reward for, in eternity would be, let's just say, right? Something like the certain view of martyrdom that some Muslims have, then it would be taught in that sense. It's not. We don't see that being taught in the New Testament.
Yeah, I don't want to beat the martyrdom to death, but guys like Bart
Sure.
Ehrman would say that the very first Christians, let's say from 30 AD to 50 to 60, they weren't really
Mhm.
persecuted that much at all.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with him. I would say we don't really see persecution, empire-wide persecution for those time periods. I mean,
Right.
there's persecution within the Jewish communities. It seems like people are put out of their homes and kicked out, and they're not
Right. So
they're not accepted, obviously.
So the major
some are killed. Some are killed.
So the major persecution starts on the second, third, fourth generation Christians who weren't in the know. They would be akin to the
even that. I so from my reading of some historians, and I can't off the top of my head give you the sources. It doesn't seem like it's very often where there's like an empire-wide Roman persecution of Christians. There's pockets of governors. Some emperors will, go a certain route and be a little more aggressive and stuff like that. Yeah. So, I mean, do we see it in the Bible in regards to persecution? James is killed. I mean, that's persecution. Persecution comes on them, it seems like, under the leadership of Paul at a certain point. The dispersion that happens in Acts is because of persecution upon them. Those early first generation guys, they go up into Samaria and stuff like that. So there's persecution happening, and you can even argue that's locally contained within Judea, the fact that they can go up to Samaria. But it seems like anywhere they go, it comes with the territory, because wherever they're going, they're preaching this gospel. By preaching this gospel, they're denying the faith that these individuals hold, and depending where they are, they get more or less aggressive, whether that be Jew or Gentile, by the way. Sometimes it's the Greeks that get aggressive, like I believe it's the one with the priests of Artemis, or the Masons of Artemis or something like that, right? Or that be Jewish synagogue leaders that are chasing them out of town and beating them and all that stuff.
Yeah, I want to get your opinion on a couple of things. Like you mentioned worldview before, and I do think where you start in your worldview has a big impact on what you believe or not believe.
Correct.
But I want your opinion. I think you and I are the same, or very close to the same, even though you're a theist and I'm an atheist. And you can tell me if you think I'm wrong. If you and I were to walk down the street together and see someone collapse, start frothing at the mouth and wiggling around and kind of like seizing up, and we see this, and then we see like a crowd gathering around, and one person says, "Call 911, this person is having an epileptic seizure." And then person two yells out, "Call a priest, this person is demon possessed."
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a guess, but my guess is you would say, "Call 911, this person's having an epileptic seizure." And I would say, "Call 911, this person's having an epileptic seizure." Both you and I, even though your worldview is theistic and my worldview is atheistic, materialistic, naturalistic, would not immediately jump to demon possession, would we?
Yeah. Would we? My immediate reaction would be call 911 as I pray for this guy. So that's just I'm telling you exactly raw what my reaction would be.
Would you jump to demon possession, or would you?
I would pray for him.
But would you jump to demon possession?
So I don't think I wouldn't necessarily conclude that it's demon possession. I wouldn't rule it out of the realm of possibility.
Okay.
And look, to be fair, obviously there's Christians out there that would completely disagree with me. I mean, but it's just there's a number of things I've seen in my life and experience where I would say I wouldn't rule that outside of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and as a theist, as an atheist, listening to a theist, I can appreciate that, but I still think you and I are the same, that odds are it's more probable that they're having some type of mental health or physical health. Yeah, demon possession could be a 1%, 2%, 3% chance, but odds, you and I are the same. We would say that's probably some type of health disorder, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily pull that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And this is why I think that oftentimes when people talk about worldviews, we're actually not that far apart. Like I still allow for the possibility of demon possession as well. Like I could be totally wrong. Christianity is true. There's such things as angels and demons. But for me, it's just a very, very low percent chance of that. For you, it's a little higher. But in everyday life, I think you and I operate like the natural laws of physics work, and there's biological health, and we don't jump there. And so when I talk about,
Yeah, I don't think the biblical worldview actually presents a world in which we jump everything having some kind of a supernatural reason or a cause or something like that. I don't think that. I mean, some Christians might act like that, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case, right? So,
unless we're talking about the New Testament.
well, no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, people are still going off of evidences. So the folks in the New Testament, right? Like when they planted a vineyard and it rained, right? These folks aren't walking around saying there's a supernatural cause for the rain.
Yeah, but what I was getting at with that example, though, is the New Testament is that person who falls and has this epileptic seizure. You and I are agreed that odds are there's a naturalistic explanation for what's happening. You sure it could be a demon, but probably not. And so when I look at the New Testament,
unless there's reason to believe there's a demon.
Okay, but at first
guy
glance,
falls down. Let's just say the guy falls down is having an epileptic seizure, and starts yelling out certain things that would be otherwise unknown to this individual. So say the guy falls over and starts yelling, Arthur, X, Y, and Z, right? And me and you are walking. He's not just guessing at a name, but give some details
about your life.
Would you would you reason that was just an epileptic seizure, and as a result of that?
I would agree with you. I say something's fishy here.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that would be the case in which I would say it's a more fair comparison to the New Testament.
Like if I had 8 random digits in my pocket for like my credit card number or whatever, and as he's falling down, he says 61523, and I am actually looking. Whoa! I mean, my confidence in the spiritual realm would go up.
Correct. Yeah, and again, when it comes to worldview, I don't think it's just like a purely intellectual endeavor, because I think experiences matter with these things as well. Right.
I wanted to get your opinion on something else as well, because I've said to Christians, they often ask me, what would it take for you to become a Christian? And I say, I would need to see something similar to 1 Kings 18. You know, the story of Elijah and the wood, and he put water on the wood, and then they called on their gods and nothing happened. Mm-hmm. Elijah called on Yahweh and he burnt it up. I'd need to see something like that. I need to see like an amputee getting his limb back. I would need for you and me to walk through a cemetery. You pray in the name of Jesus, and someone comes bubbling through the soil alive.
Okay.
Is that so here's what I want your opinion on. Is that bad of me to ask for that type of evidence?
Is it bad of you?
Yeah.
That's a moral category you're putting in, or moral judgment.
Am I wrong to ask for that type of evidence?
So the way I would judge a situation like this is, how often do we see those things happening in the book? So how often do we see a situation like the Elijah story happening? If the occurrence of it is more often, I would say you're within like reasonable grounds. If people are coming back to the dead, from the dead, just, on the regular, not all the time, but on the regular, like just left and right, Christians are praying and dead folks are rising from the dead, I would say it's reasonable for you to do that. What I would say is those situations specifically are probably the most, some of the most, maybe not the most, rare seen occurrences we see in the Bible. Like, how many times do dead people come back from the dead? So there's the widow, there's Lazarus, there's the widow, right? That her son is being carried out.
That died, right?
Yeah, and it seems I would conclude that she's dead. Old Testament wise, I think there's one woman within like the Elijah's. I think it's either Elijah or Elisha.
Elijah's bones. And someone was put next to his grave, and they came back to life. And then there's Matthew 27, the dead walked into Jerusalem.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced whether that is actually literal. That could be some kind of apocalyptic literature going on there.
But I hear what you're saying,
yeah.
that it's very rare in the Bible, so therefore it should be rare in real life. But is it the Gospel of John? It says that Jesus said, "You will do greater things than I have."
Yeah, I think that's in number. I don't think that's in. I think that's greater in number.
But wouldn't that mean then there should be more resurrections if it's greater than number?
Not necessarily. I mean, what are the things that Jesus did in regards to miracles? I mean, even if it is, the number is not that great in regards to the amount of people Jesus brought back from the dead. 3. So all of Christian history bringing back 6 people from the dead, that's 100% increase there, That's pretty good.
So you lean towards that. My markers of what would change my mind are too stringent.
I think you've and we're having a friendly discourse here, by the way. And I feel there's a good kind of understanding between the two of you. If I was having this conversation with one of my really good friends that I've known for a long time, my response would be like, "Hey man, I think you're intentionally setting this up in a way where you get your way."
Like, I honestly do think my whole worldview would be shattered if I saw something like that. I'm not lying.
Well, yeah, because they're so rare and big, obviously it would be shattered.
And the reason why
not surprised. And by the way, I'm not saying you're not sincere.
Right.
That's definitely not what I'm saying.
But the reason why I think I would call this high standards. The reason why my standards so high on this is because I don't want to be fooled and duped into believing something that's not true.
Yeah, and I think you're completely in your rights for that. I think that's fine. Let me ask you a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
By the way, can you tell me your first name?
Doug.
I'm Doug.
Past tense of dig.
I just yeah. My wife teaches English as a second language, and we were regularly talking about it. And she has to regularly explain to folks how stupid English is.
It is.
And I learned English as a second language, so it was very confusing, especially coming from Armenian, where everything's spelled and pronounced the same way. So ease and just like multiple letters making multiple sounds is just really weird.
Is it similar to Persian? Is Armenian Persian?
So Armenian and Persian are both a part of the Indo-European language, but the Armenian script is not like the Persian script. So in Farsi, they write from right to left, or as we would say, the wrong way. But linguistically, they're both Indo-European, but Armenian seems like it's its own branch. It's very interesting.
Some people say French is the best, most romantic language, but I've heard someone speak in Persian. I'm going
Farsi. My wife speaks Farsi. She's Armenian from Iran, and my parents are also Armenians from Iran. So I've grown up with Farsi all around me. Still have it around me. Spent a year and a half in Armenia recently, and lots of Persian friends.
It's a seductive language.
Farsi poetry is some of the most beautiful poetry you will listen to.
Yeah, I've heard some of it. It's amazing.
Linguistics is phenomenal. And I mean, I pick up words and here and there, But when I was younger, I was learning Farsi. I just gave up on it for some stupid reason. I wish I didn't. Because there's some really cool historical stuff. Where was I? Yeah, so
you're going to ask me about something.
Sidetracked. So Doug, your religious, what's your background, like worldview wise, right? Like, did you grow up in a Christian home, Catholic, whatever? Like, yeah. So
raised in a Christian home, evangelical.
Mm-hmm.
Started out
and believe this stuff till I don't know what age.
I started doubting in my mid-30s. I was out at around 40. I was a deist for a short while, and then became an atheist.
Were you married and stuff like that at this point?
Oh yeah, I got married at age 22, young.
Let me just a side note for folks watching. Would you recommend folks getting married that young?
Yes.
Okay, we agree on that.
Yes, but I
got married towards my later 20s. But
if they're mature, like if they're complete idiots, then no. But the thing is, I look at the you're of a different generation, man. Like I know
you were younger, and your parents told you, "Hey, man up! You're gonna get married in like 10 years." I left home when I was 15. I was independent. I look at 28, 30-year-olds today, and I mean, they know nothing.
they're fragile. They're if the world really goes up craps creek, I mean,
Sideways.
they don't know how to survive. It's like
Yeah.
if the
It's
government can't
hardships,
help
man.
them, I mean, they're helpless.
It's really hardships, Doug. It really is. Right? Because like I in my first 11 years of life when I was in Armenia, I saw war. I saw Armenia was at war with Azerbaijan. Communism fell. I remember the fall of communism in Armenia, and I was like 3.
Wow.
I was 3, 4 years old. I remember like what my neighbors were doing, what the adults were doing, the happiness, people shooting guns in the air. Like, but as a 3, 4 year old seeing that stuff, and then I remember not having food to eat because of all the junk that came after communism fell, money going and becoming nothing. Like some of this stuff develops you in a certain way where you, it just matures you. And I think generally in America, when I compare American young people to young people in Armenia specifically, because I have connections there, they're worlds apart. And I think the number one difference between them is difficulties.
Yeah.
We're too pampered. Everything's too easy. Okay. So you were married. That's cool, man. You got married young. And what led you to kind of starting to doubt this stuff?
I think I was just like a lot of people. 9/11, when that happened, and the internet boom, like people started really questioning religion. In the early 2000s, I started really asking the question: Is what I believe true? And not only that, but asking the question: Do I really understand the other side, and why they believe what they believe, or why they don't believe what I believe? And understanding and asking the what's more likely question really helped. And here's another big one. My view of hell changed. I was raised
To what?
I was raised in the eternal conscious torment world. You know, that's what hell is. And I started really asking questions like, would a God create anything at all if he knew this is what would result? Some people would end up there.
That's interesting. Why didn't your view change to something like annihilationism?
Um, because, well, even if it's better, or universalism is
Okay.
probably the best if from the theistic point of view.
But I'm not saying universalism. I'm
Right.
saying annihilationism. Like just so instead of hell, they just stop existing.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, there wasn't a predominant view in Christianity. It still isn't. And
Yeah.
so it never really latched on to me. But let me be clear. It's hell is just one factor, just like for you, there's many factors why you do believe.
Right.
It's more or less, do I have any good reason to think any of this is true? Like, do really a man coming back from the dead, really a man claiming to be God? Like, there's people today who make those claims, and I don't immediately believe it. In fact, I disbelieve it until I have sufficient evidence to believe it, and then I ask myself, is there sufficient evidence to believe the core propositions of Christianity? And I came to the conclusion, no. I do believe that we could have the New Testament exactly the way we see it today, and Christianity still be false.
Do you think my analysis was fair when I said that it couldn't, considering that the words of Jesus would be deceptive, if we want to be very gracious, a complete lie, like he's a con man at the very most, and then the disciples themselves making up lies, like blatant lies.
I think that the view of lying, even back in the first century, is the different view of lying today. So,
Okay.
Even in cultures today, like you've heard the Nazi argument, right? Of would you lie to save a few Jews in your basement?
Yeah. I've written papers on it.
Yeah. And so the answer most philosophers say is yes, that's a moral thing to do, is to lie to save a life. I think this is what the New Testament authors, if they truly believe that Jesus, well, no, if they're producing this narrative of a physical Jesus rising, they had this greater good idea in their head, like the kingdom of God is at hand. And so they didn't view this as lying. They viewed it as a way to make it more real for people, as a reason to believe it and accept it. And so for them, it was the Nazis in the Jews in the basement to protect them from the Nazis. We got to protect these people from the evil one. let's produce this narrative even though we know it's not true, if you believe the traditional authorship.
Okay. Cool.
But-
well, thanks for this, man. I do have to go.
Okay, yeah, me
but
too.
go ahead. No,
I
no,
was just going to
yeah.
say, like, even if you assume the worst case of that line was viewed the same way as today, and every author purposely lied, I still would say that is far, far, far more likely than a man rising from the dead. In other words, we have examples in history of people lying and great conspiracy theories existing for long periods of time, like thousands of years. Like look at Islam. Like, did Muhammad hear from Allah in a cave through Gabriel? Of course not. Like, but yet it still persists.
Oh, you and I might have different analysis there.
Well, you might think it's a demon, but I don't know. But
I clearly think it's a demon. But
yeah, but
I think, look, he heard something. So
and Paul saw
let's leave
something.
it there. Sure. I mean, yeah, I would agree. Paul did see something. No, I don't necessarily disagree. I think both of them saw something. I think they're real experiences. But yeah, I gotta go because I've been on it for 2 hours and 50 minutes now.
Oh, you're an amateur.
Yeah,
I've been on for 3 hours 27.
I think I did an interview. I did an interview with a guy named Carl Moser, and that we were discussing like theology. He's a theologian. That went on maybe long. I think 3 hours is the longest. But I'm planning on doing a 5-hour stream. Once I don't want to say 3,500 subscribers, but we hit 4,000 subscribers. I'll do a 5-hour stream, and then
A marathon.
invite some folks on. Maybe I'll reach out to you, and I can have some atheists pop on there too, so it could be fun.
Can you answer one question before you go?
Sure.
Because you asked me
Yeah.
what would it take for you to leave Christianity? What would you have to learn, hear, realize?
So if I were to leave Christianity, I don't think atheism would be the natural place to go. I mean, it seems like that was the case for you. You went into some kind of a deism or.
But what did you have to learn to leave Christianity and say Christianity is false? What would you have to learn, hear, see?
I think substantive arguments against the resurrection, that it didn't happen. If I was convinced that the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen, then Christianity goes out the window.
And what specifically would you have to see about the resurrection? Like, can you imagine anything you would learn and say, oh, really? This okay, I don't believe it anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I would sit there and say I would have to see A, B, and C. I'm kind of refraining or restraining myself from saying, well, yeah, if they found the tomb of Jesus and he's in there or something like that, right? I mean, that's a given, but I don't want to be unfair to my criticism of you coming up with a very difficult kind of scenario in there. So I'll be gracious in that sense. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it would have to be good enough where I go, yeah, no resurrection. And at that point, I would probably end up being a theist of some sort.
A classical theist / deist type.
Yeah, I would say like something like the philosopher's God.
Yeah.
That would be the most reasonable conclusion I would come to.
Okay. Well, thanks for your answer and thanks for hopping on. I wish more people would be like you.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. And you as well. So this has been a really good example of a normal conversation. Christians and atheists be nice to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
So if there's one thing you guys can learn from this conversation is just be normal in your conversations. Don't yell. Don't accuse each other of being like from Satan. I'm sorry, by the way. Like if there's people out there that say, you're influenced and I don't know.
Oh, it doesn't bother me at all.
No, I know, but there's people that do that. It's just nonsense. So yeah, and for the atheists, don't just claim Christians are stupid. That's not fair as well.
Yeah, that's not fair. I used to be a Christian, and I don't think my IQ went up just because I left Christianity.
Correct. It's like a boom. Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Man. Maybe we can reconnect some other time.
Happy New Year, Arthur.
You too.